pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Roll call, please.
Board Member Joseph?
Here.
Board Member Oral?
He's absent.
Board Member Washington?
Is absent.
Vice Chair Abodamos?
I'm here, but I just wanted to say, Beth, I saw you waving this time.
Chair Garcia?
Here. Thank you, Board. We'll move now to report on closed session, confirmation of reportable action. Mr. Ross?
Chair, board members, members of the public, your board convened in open session at 5:37 p.m. to address the matters agendized for closed session consideration. After determining that there were no comments on the matters scheduled for closed session consideration, you adjourned to closed session at 5:38. The closed session concluded at 6:12 p.m. With respect to agenda item number 1, there was no reportable action under the common law attorney-client privilege, and that provided by Government Code Section 54-956.9 D2. Second matter, there was no reportable action under the provisions of Government Code Section 54-957 B. That would conclude the report unless there are questions.
Any questions, directors? Hearing none, seeing none. We'll move on now to our public comment. Any public comment on
No.
matters not on the agenda?
No, Chair. None
None?
have been received.
Okay, we have no public comment on that. We'll close public comment then on those matters and move now to any agenda changes. If none, we'll move on to the consent calendar. As our- yes,
Chair, I'll move that we adopt the consent calendar.
very good, thank you. Is there a second? You're muted.
And I'll second.
Very good. Motion second, roll call, please.
Board Member Joseph?
Yes.
Vice Chair Abodamos?
Yes.
Chair Garcia?
Yes, thank you, Board. Move on now to our public hearing. The item is an introduction and first read by title only of an ordinance adopting by reference the 2022 edition of the California Code of Regulations, Title 24, and related model codes with appendices and amendments as identified herein through express findings of local necessity, repealing ordinance 2019-03 of the American Canyon Fire Protection District, and all other ordinances and parts of ordinances in conflict therewith.
Thank you, Chair.
Bill, you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm joined tonight by George Apple. George is attending virtually. George serves as our contracted fire marshal for the fire district and truly is our subject matter expert on all things related to the fire code. So background, every 3 years we are local entities are required to revise and adopt the most updated versions to the Uniform Fire Code, which is also tied to the Uniform Building Code. So tonight would be our first reading of this, what we would be calling the 2022 version of the Uniform Fire Code. This would be our first reading, as I said. A second reading would happen next month, and that would allow us to adopt these changes or revisions to the fire code January 1st of 2023. So with that, this is just a brief read and title only. However, if there are any questions that you may have, be happy to answer those now, or Mr. Apple will be able to assist as well.
Any questions before I open the public hearing? No. Seeing none, hearing none, public hearing is now open.
No comment.
We received no comment. Anybody from attending in person wanting to comment? Seeing none, public hearing has been closed. We'll return to the board for the discussion, desired action.
Well, Mr. Chair, just as a point of clarification, back in 2019, we adopted this, and there were some amendments. So the real question for me is, what's the comparison between the 2019 version and what we see tonight?
Yeah, for that, I obviously wasn't here when the board adopted in 2019, so I'll defer that to Mr. Apple, but I believe we truly have no substantial changes in this code revision.
That's what I thought.
Mr. Apple?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chief. As Chief just said, there's no significant changes for our adoption or for our amendments. We're carrying over what has been previously required by the city and the district. The biggest of those being the fire sprinkler requirements, which is an amendment from the model codes requiring that at a lower threshold. But with each code edition that comes from the International Code Council and subsequently adopted by the State Fire Marshal's Office and the Building Standards Commission, there's changes in sections, and sections get moved around and whatnot. So that's really what we see in front of you, is a lot of administrative cleanup from the code sections that have moved around. And then there is a couple of, I'll call them errors that we had in there, like a requirement is an example requirement for smoke duct detector. That was in a wrong section that had been previously called out. So and that's why, frankly, we have to spend so much time kind of combing through it, is to see where those small little changes have occurred. But so that's really what the amendments are in front of you, is carrying forward what you had from many years past and clean up to match the current code sections.
Okay, well, thank you. Then, if there is no other comments or concerns, I'll make a motion that we introduce and make the first reading by title only of Ordinance 2022-01, an ordinance of the American Canyon Fire Protection District Board of Directors, adopting by reference the 2022 edition of the California Code of Regulations, Title 24, Part 9, and related model codes with appendices and amendments as identified herein through express findings of local necessity, and repealing all conflicting ordinances and parts of ordinances, and applying the new ordinance of the district and Title 24, 2022 edition of the California Building Standards Code, including the following parts, and I won't refer to all those following parts.
I'll second.
Motion second. Roll call, please.
Board Member Joseph.
Yes.
Vice Chair Abu-Damus.
Yes.
Chair Garcia.
Yes. Thank you, directors. I think the old technology thing they have to fix there. Okay, moving on to our agenda then. Move on to our business items. Item 7, proposed long-range master plan. I think we've all received a copy of that. Very good. And an opportunity to have a conversation with Chief Bellier. Very good.
All right, thank you, Chair. Several months ago, the district realized the need that with the amount of potential growth that the city is going to be experiencing, not only now but into the future, that there was a need to have what we refer to as a long-range master plan. Really going to give us something, a document to help guide us in not only the short term but the long term for the district, to ensure that, quite frankly, the district is positioned well so that as the city grows, we are ready to handle the expanded calls for service, and we're truly not playing catch up in that sense, where the city's growth got out in front of the fire district. So through a process, we identified AP Triton Consulting as the consultant to conduct that master plan. This has been a several-month process. Really looked top to bottom at the district, looked at the growth, the risk to the city, or actually to the district as a whole, because the district does encompass outside of the city limits. So, as many of you have seen, this is a rather substantial document, I believe 211 pages. Included also not only looking at industry standards, NFPA, the Center for Professional Excellence, but also a series of stakeholder meetings, community outreach, as well as interviews internally as well with different memberships. It looked not only at our operations, but our facilities, what we refer to as our support programs or specialized programs. So, like I said earlier, quite the top to bottom view of the district as well as our community risk. And so with that, we're joined virtually tonight by Mr. Kurt Ladapow, who was the project lead for AP Triton. Mr. Ladapow has over 40 years of public safety experience, with 27 of those years in public administration in both the fire chief or chief officer positions. He's developed and implemented numerous comprehensive fire and emergency service related plans, and he has facilitated the adoption of those plans in a variety of governing bodies. Mr. Ladapow's resume is quite extensive. However, I think Mr. Ladapow will speak for himself as he presents this master plan. He is also joined by one of his team members, Mr. Frank Blackley, as well. So with that, Kurt, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thanks, Chief.
Good evening,
Mr.
welcome,
Chair,
good to have you with us.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, members of the board, thank you for this opportunity. Let me see if I can share my screen here. There we go. I always cringe when somebody reads my bio. I'd like to adjust the years a little bit so I look a little younger. All right. And the chief was right. I do have our lead community risk assessment subject matter expert, Frank Blackley, on the call with us, should there be any risk-related calls or requests, questions. We are very pleased to have this opportunity to present your master plan to you for your consideration and where it might take you. At AP Triton, we pride ourselves in being a neutral third party. We come into these projects with no preconceived notions, no preconceived ideas or outcomes, even though some of us may or may not have been in the area from time to time as tourists. We use data, research, and science to come about the findings and the recommendations. And so the purposes of the master plan are right there in front of you. What I'd like to call attention to is that bullet that starts with anticipate community growth. This is a snapshot in time. Our snapshot moved a little bit because it seemed like about whenever we were ready to close the window on that snapshot, there we'd get word about another potential development, and we wanted to make sure we captured as much as possible. So the data that you'll see in front of you is, other than the response data, which is getting a little dated, is fairly current. And then we do have some recommended steps for you. And when we get there, we'll discuss a little bit about the short, the medium, and the long. And it's our intent in the industry, and when I was on the fire chief side, that master planning would keep the department from lagging behind the community growth and development, and even more important, from lagging behind in protecting the assets at risk, not just the assessed valuation, but the employers, the sales tax generators, the visitors, and your community. So a lot of the data did come, in fact, from the district as well as some other sources. The chief mentioned we did interviews, rather extensive. We had two 2 team members on site for 3 days. As a result, we identified factors that influence risk and performance. And we did identify opportunities for system delivery. I also would like to point out that quite often when we're doing these projects, as we're working back and forth with the chief or with staff, there are times that things will come up and we'll note that some progress is already being made. It's not unusual for some of the recommendations that end up in the report to already be underway. This is your community. You live there. You're very familiar with the community, but it kind of sets the tone for the foundation. When we develop these reports, we do attempt to make them as layperson friendly as possible. Same thing with this PowerPoint. I've tried to lay it out in such a way that it sets the stage and tells a story. And that's pretty much the way we also approach our studies. You have a full service department, what's commonly referred to in our trade as all risk, 2 staff stations, 21 full-time career firefighters. Some of the data that was collected actually went back to a time when you were only running one of those stations staffed. So you'll see some interesting dynamics in the data. Your minimum staffing is 6 firefighters. That does not include your admin staff. It's basically the folks on the rigs. Traditional structural and wildland fire suppression. Hats off, you're running EMS at the advanced level. I had a meeting today with the department that, interesting enough, is very large, and they are not yet at that level. You do hazardous materials first response for isolate and deny, but you also participate in the hazardous materials team with 3 specialists. Technical, swift water rescues, etc. You heard from Mr. Apple on your life safety programs, code enforcements, plan reviews, the typical list or the typical menu. Public education prevention, and as is not uncommon, initial fire cause and origin. So the service area, obviously the city limits are the blue, and then you tack on the additional area that is beyond the city limits that makes up the city and the district. Your 2 stations are located here in the south end, almost immediately across from each other. Currently, this was the org chart as of the snapshot in time. Your lean and mean, and in your service delivery program, we've commented on some concerns and potential improvements later in the study. Your admin support staff, the chief, the assistant chief, the executive office administrator, and a fire executive assistant. Your staffing online, 6 captains, 10 firefighter driver operators, which is something that is typical for your area, to have your firefighters also qualified to be driver operators. You're currently carrying 2 probationary folks, and you have a reserve program. So this is your breakdown from 20 to 21. And it's always interesting when we do these studies because as we're interviewing folks, we often hear, oh, well, the department's running 95% EMS calls, medical calls. And in actuality, once we start drilling down into the data, the truth does come out, if you will, in the data analysis. So in your case, in this particular study period, you ran 62% on medical calls, good intent, service. I'll let the chief explain those. And then at the fire level, this is, I'm used to seeing 4%. Every once in a while, we'll do a study and I'll see 2 or 3%. So really in this area, you're fairly normal. Medical response is down from what we would normally see across the board. Not unusual for us to see up in the 70 percentiles. If an agency also does transport, that's where you see the high percentage numbers. So as I shared with you, I've laid this out to tell a story. So the first part of the story was how you're staffed. The first part of the story is here's the area you're protecting as far as land mass. Now, what I've done in this section is I pulled out highlights from the community risk section, because this portrays what you're protecting in addition to lives. So target hazards are usually identified as those locations that have a potential for serious injury, life loss, and or devastation as far as assets. You'll see today they're fairly localized in the south end. And what is typical for an agency such as yours is we identify the target hazards and we do comprehensive pre-plans in the event they have an incident. Assembly occupancies. Put this in here so you can see, the areas within your response area that have the potential for high life loss or injury. And this is purely because of the number of folks that can be assembled in an assembly occupancy. These occupancies would be classified as those occupancies that would hold 50 folks or greater. Multifamilies. Today, you have a handful of them. We pay very close attention to multifamily occupancies. Again, because of the sheer nature of a multifamily occupancy, the potential for increased call volume, as well as in the event of a fire, potential for life loss. Large buildings greater than 100,000 square feet, why do we care? Because these buildings take a considerable amount of staffing in the event there is an incident within the building, such as a large fire. And as we were running through the study, and Frank was putting this section together, I paused on this one because, as you'll note, today, your large buildings greater than 100,000 square feet are up here in the north and northwest, and your fire stations are down here. Fire flow. So depending on the size of the organization, we will set the map at a certain level. We've set the map at 2,500 gallons per minute for this study, and that has everything to do with your daily staffing. So if you figure about 150 to 175 gallons per minute per firefighter, plus the apparatus, plus your master streams, your demand is actually quite high for your staffing levels. New developments. I mentioned as we started into this section, we tried, Frank, on a regular basis, was on calls with the community development department, trying to make sure we had the latest information. So as of 2 or 3 months ago, this is the information we were provided relative to new developments. So we pay real close attention to apartments. We pay real close attention to hotels. We pay real close attention to multifamily residentials. Not that we don't pay attention to the others. However, you're going to see the call concentration maps. The reality of those types of occupancies is they generate calls. People movement, people concentration generates calls. So let's take a look at service and delivery. So whenever we do a project, we always ask the department for their adopted performance objectives. The performance objectives that we utilized are on page 59 of your study. And when you look at page 59, you'll see that some of the performance objectives are bold and some are not. The ones that are bolded are the performance objectives that are currently utilized by the district that we measure to. The others are, as the chief mentioned, they come out of the National Fire Protection Association Standard 1710. Monthly response workloads. This is over the period of the study. There's really nothing unusual here. You've got to, it slows down around April. you're peaking in January, and then you have a slow decline. And then you start to come back up in May. Typically, this has to do with flow throughout the district, people movement, et cetera. Daily response workload, very consistent. Your slowest day is Sunday, not unusual. You peak right there on Wednesday. A lot of folks moving around probably. And then let's take a look at hourly response. This is not an unusual hourly response analysis. Almost all, with minor exception, most of the projects we do, we start to see the call volumes start to come up around 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, particularly for commuter based communities and or ones that have through fares going through them for the commuters. So we've got a peak here right around the 10 o'clock hour, it drops off. And then we start to come up again around noon. People are moving around again. And then you get some highs and lows here. It starts to drop off, and then you peak at that commuter time, right around 6 o'clock at night. And then it starts to fall off. I don't want you to think you're not running any calls during that period of time, because you are. And I'll show you another graph in a minute. So this is the response workload that is a little skewed. It's not that it's inaccurate, but the first thing that I spotted was how much workload Engine 11 is carrying. A good portion of the study period, the second engine was not in service. So Engine 11 was handling a majority of the calls, hence the spike. So here's where we start looking at performance. So our reality is there are 3 areas that can be controlled by the agency or by their contract dispatching center. One of them is call answer time. We were unable to get that data from the dispatch center. The next is call processing time. So you will see that call processing by the dispatch center for fires, as an example, was a little over 2 minutes. So this is, hello, 911, what's your emergency? And they start plugging in the information and then getting ready to tone the station out. The NFPA standard to shoot for here is 60 seconds, 90% of the time. 90% of the time dictates a percentile, excuse me, not an average. If you run averages, you'll be fooled into thinking that the performance is greater than it is. What this reflects is 90% of the time it's taking the dispatch center a little over 2 minutes to process a fire call. And a little over 1.5 minutes for medical rescue. These are your 2 critical calls here. We would expect to see other calls a little slower. Turnout time. So what is turnout time? Turnout time is another element that you can control, and we get a lot of debate on this. All the data that we analyzed here so far is pulled from the computer-aided dispatch center. So turnout time is the time the tone goes off at the station to the time the units go in service. We do normally see a little bit of lag time for fires, and we account that to folks having to put the proper attire on before they get on the rig and roll out the door. The district objective for turnout time is 60 seconds, 90% of the time. I believe this is an area that the chief has probably already started working on. Sometimes this is simply educating and bringing to folks' attention what the data is saying and encouraging them to improve. Sometimes it's the layout of the station. I've been on station inspections where there is no way they could get from any place in the station other than if they're standing right next to the fire engine to the rig and get out the door. So received to arrival. The district's objective is 5 minutes, 90% of the time. Tremendous opportunity here for improvement. There's one element of the continuum that we never, ever encourage any change in, and that is speed. All of our calculations on the maps you're going to see in a minute, well, any travel time calculation you see in the report is based on posted speed limit, and the program we use accommodates stops, accelerations, turns, etc. Concurrent incidents, this tells us how busy your system is. And as you'll see, 85% of the time, you've got a single incident, but 13% of the time, you're getting banged out or alarmed on 2 incidents at once, and then it starts to go down from there. As you develop and as the system gets busier, you will see these numbers change. So I talked about the movement of folks. I talked about developments. I talked about the different types of developments. So during the study period, this is your all incident demand density. So it's no secret, you guys live there right now, the majority of the population, particularly the multifams, the apartments, et cetera, and the travel pathway is right through this area. So as you see development creep up, and depending on the type of development, this model will change. Not unusual. Your EMS incident demand is going to be very similar to your other incident demand. People moving around will result in incidents. People driving through the district will result in incidents. Structure fires, we did plot them, the ones that are outside, because those usually trigger an automatic or a mutual aid from you all. Right now, most of them are down here in the south end. It will be interesting over the years to watch the growth and see if that changes. Certainly, the implementation of mandatory residential sprinklers and depending on your thresholds will have an impact on the size of the fire. However, it will not necessarily mean you don't have any fires. I always ask our analysts to run this particular analysis for us, because there are times when we'll come into a project and they'll look at some of the other data and skip over this one and come to the conclusion, well, nothing else is going on here. Why don't we just shut down at night? Well, actually, you're having quite a bit of activity in the evening hours after administration is shut down. And one of our recommendations has to do with the implementation of additional command and control. From a safety perspective, from a risk perspective, it is a positive move forward in the event you were to follow that recommendation to add a chief officer to the shift, because you have stuff going on into the night and through the morning. And this is just structure fires. So travel times I shared with you. The model uses your street network. It actually won't work unless you have streets, which is why you don't see anything out here. This is your 0 to 4 minute, and then your 4 to 8. A lot of times the 4 to 8 has everything to do with the road network or the distance away from a station. As you look at some of our recommendations in here, in our report, as we get to those, it's kind of, I don't want to say it's a no-brainer, but as we looked at your development and we looked at what's going on up here in the north, we do believe it's important to make some changes in station locations. Support programs, the chief did mention that we did a pretty deep dive on all those support programs, and that starts on page 91. Given the length of this study, if I were to tell the entire story, we'd be here for a couple hours. But there's a lot of really good information in those sections for you. Somewhat of a report card, and for your community members, it's really a pretty good read to understand all the dynamics of your fire district. So the conclusions and recommendations. As the team is working through their analysis and building the report, so to speak, we are in fact the team. I believe this project had 5 subject matter experts on it. Frank was one of them in risk. We had a finance SME on here. Obviously, I had a GIS analyst and a couple others. So as they're building the report, they're highlighting findings to go back to. And the reason they do that is the findings typically will celebrate and or drive a deeper dive for the recommendations. So here's some key findings. And I always like to see positives as the project lead coming out of the team. The working relationship between the district and the city to us and through our interviews appear to be very positive. Your policies and procedures are up to date. You're moving towards an electronic database for your policies and procedures. That's very positive for an organization your size. However, as I'd already mentioned, as we looked at the risk, as we looked at the types of calls you're running, particularly at night, and how thin you are relative to command and control, it was noted that you do not have a mid-level management, i.e. battalion chief coverage. Your SOGs are not formally reviewed annually. I'm sure that there's a movement to change that. And we talked about those target hazards, whereas they're known. There now needs to be a formal program that memorializes that planning. You have a well-defined special ops program, including hazmat, and you're part of a larger hazmat response program. Staffing is tight. And when we look at the modern fire service of today and all the statutory mandates and yes, the unfunded mandates that we deal with on a regular basis, it's becoming, even for a 2-station operation, it's becoming a very complex business to operate, which drives the need for administrative support. Kudos, you've got a reserve support program. That's always very positive. And various programs, including EMS weed abatement and your CERT program. A majority of the CERT programs in the state of California are fire-based. Hats off to you guys. Your staffing per population is a little lean for your community, and there's, one of our recommendations will help you address that. Our finance SME took a really good look at your finances and commented very positively on your management practices. We already walked through the busiest workloads. And I showed you the data that talked about single incidents versus multiple. Call processing times exceed recommendations with an unusual spike. I mean, it exceeds recommendations throughout, but we saw an unusual spike, a slowdown in processing at 3 in the morning. I've mentioned this to the chief. I don't know if they're changing shift at that time or what is going on. We're doing a companion study up in Napa City, and I'm reviewing our drafts on that now. And so we'll probably be making some recommendations for the dispatch center. Chief mentioned that we did facility inspections. The crew did in fact do that. 211 is undersized. You're unable to fit modern fire apparatus and your sleeping areas. As we transition to diversity, equity, and inclusivity, we are paying closer and closer attention in the industry to gender segregation and whether or not the House will accommodate DEI. And we commented on some training challenges. 11's adequate in size. However, future expansion is going to be limited, and the admin side is extremely tight. A comprehensive risk reduction program, and if you wish, at the end of the presentation, if you have questions on that, Frank is actually an instructor at the National Fire Academy for those programs. An adequate training facility. We're actually noting this in the area. I think there's a tremendous opportunity here should you move forward with discussions on a training facility. So short terms. So these are not cast in stone. They're offered for your consideration, and there's an explanation within the study that it's not our expectation. These are our recommendations. It's your fire department. You're the policymakers. It is not our expectation that all these will be done at once, and some may have to wait for revenue streams to be identified for them to take place. However, in the next 2 to 3 years, we are recommending you establish a life safety inspection program for your facilities. You consider hiring 3 shift battalion chiefs, add another support member. A formalized safety committee within the fire district is a positive. And actually, when you look at some of the Cal OSHA requirements, you'll be able to check a box in that area. The existing fee schedule, I'm trying to remember, Chief, we did have a discussion on this. I believe it's scheduled to be updated or is already being done. I know there's some challenges right now with impact fees. Data. You know, it's kind of like every time we do an after action on a fire response, we always talk about communications. Well, pretty much every study we do, we talk about quality control for data and incident reporting, because everything we analyze starts with your data, with your incident reporting. And coupled with that, the National Fire Incident Reporting System does offer training classes that would be a very positive for your staff. Community risk reduction program. Community risk reduction embodies the entire community. It's not just the fire department. It's your businesses, it's your citizens, it's your homeowners associations. It's a, I'm trying to think of the word, Frank.
It's really looking at all the risks, not just fire risk.
Capital improvement replacement. This is another area, and it's interesting. Some of us go back to Proposition 13, where we wiped out all these programs, and they've been slow to come back. However, from a planning perspective and a fiscal management, this is not an unusual recommendation. So the risk. I've mentioned more than once that we look at the risk, we look at the development, we look at fire flow, we look at multifamily occupancies, we look at multi-story buildings. And as you drive through the district, they may not jump out at you, but with your large square footage, your high fire flow, and what's coming and what's already there, we truly believe it's time for you to start considering in that midterm or sooner to recruit additional staff and staff the truck company the district's truck company full time. Today, if the crew takes the truck instead of the engine, that eliminates 1 fire engine from your effective response force. If they don't take the truck, and it's a working incident that needs truck work, now you're waiting for the truck to come from Vallejo or Napa. Determine a new site for 211. It takes a while to do land acquisition and planning and and get the architects on board. That's why this starts in the midterm or sooner. In the report, you will see that we've run an analysis and given you a spot to consider in the vicinity of. When we use the term vicinity of, it's best that you not get too far off of that spot. And if you do, then it should be remodeled for response time effectiveness. As you're taking a look at a potential new Station 211, Not a bad time to take a look at your administrative needs in the short and long term. Personally, when I built fire stations or designed them, or was asked to comment, I like to put about 50 years into a station. The worst thing that can happen is the day you back into a fire station, it's obsolete. Greater emphasis upon the quality assurance of time data inputs. We talked a little bit about that already. Hats off. I've already given you kudos for your EMS program. It's very positive. With the statutory changes and the expectations and the quality control mandates, et cetera, running an EMS program, you may wish to consider creating a full-time position for EMS program administration, or possibly initially one that can be shared with some other duties. So long-term, short, mid, find the land, do space planning, get an architect, get everything ready to go, as they said during some of the grant periods, get it shovel ready, and build it. Now, I mentioned 50 years of future. This is also a good opportunity for you to take a look at the station location, as well as consideration of a training facility within the district, and possibly having discussions with some of your neighbors about developing a regional program. That concludes the high flight and walkthrough of our study. I chose not to do all 211 pages. I'm pretty sure you would not have been happy with me. So with that, we will attempt to answer any questions you may have.
Well, thank you for the presentation. Certainly a lot of information to absorb, but very good to know our status and things we should be looking forward to accomplish to the benefit of the fire district and the community as a whole. So thank you for your presentation. Got questions from
Yes.
Board Member Joseph?
Well, first of all, thank you for the report and the presentation. Very informative. My initial reaction kind of zeroes in on the response times, and concerned that the call processing seems to be twice as long as it should. The turnout time seems to be twice as long as it should. So the immediate question in my head is, so what can we do to start shaving some seconds off there?
Yeah, great question. So I'll address the call processing time first. We are at a slight disadvantage in the fact that we contract for our dispatch services through Napa Central Dispatch. However, it's also an opportunity for us with as Mr. Latipow said, Napa Fire Department going through the same study. The data is going to be consistent. Chief Kern obviously, is being a department head or fire chief in the city of Napa, has close ties to dispatch. So we've already had, Chief Kern and I have already been discussing some different ways that we're going to, in the future, work with dispatch, the dispatch center manager to start addressing the call processing time. So that one don't immediately have as much control over as the turnout times and the response times. The turnout times, obviously there's a fair amount of variables that that come into it. Whether the guys are out training, they're doing a company inspection, they have to run back to the engine. Depending on the call type, what protective equipment they have to don prior to the call. And then, one of the other ones is just part of the growing pains of the organization having two stations. Used to be very easy. Anytime the tones went off, the guys at Station 11 knew they were going. But now with two stations and with our dispatching being done by GPS location of the rig, because that truly does give you the closest resource to the emergency. There's a little bit of hesitation at times. Is this going to be two's call or 11's call? And now that we're about a year into that, people are starting to really start to feel which calls are in which area. So I expect some of the turnout times are going to start to decrease now that there's some of that level of familiarity and with just having the growing pains of two stations and not sure which engine is going to be going. But, you know, prior to this report, that was something that we didn't really have a good grasp on. We didn't have that data, that capability to collect that data. So this is going to give us a platform in which to work off to start working with the crews to ensure that we can decrease that time. The response times, as Mr. Latipow said, the absolute worst thing to do is tell the crews to drive faster. But as I think everybody sees, the congestion inside the city is affecting it, as well as you put additional stoplights, stop signs, traffic calming devices in. While we understand that there's a bigger picture outside of just response times, those all definitely have impacts on our response times. So, you know, as traffic starts to thin out, hopefully, or, you know, conversations of roundabouts and different things, those are going to be opportunities to decrease our response times. But to a certain degree, we are kind of at the mercy of the traffic environment at the time of the call, because driving faster is not the answer, because it does create other problems that's unsafe. So I think also the other part of it is, as we look towards relocating Station 211, because the two existing stations are in such proximity of each other, we start getting more of those outlier calls, that does increase our response time. So as we look and eventually build our new station in a different area where the stations are further apart, that is also going to have another impact to decrease our response times that we see now.
Okay. The second area, of course, is the staffing and the costs that go with it. On the one hand, I think there's a good case for all of the additions. I have to admit, I went to Google to verify the 1.5 per thousand rate, because sure enough, that is the numbers, and we aren't there. So I certainly see the merit to it. The flip side is, I think we also have to be driven by our fiscal ability. We can't hire people because we should. We really should hire them because we can afford it. So that raises the question of trying to identify where there are pots of money. Certainly, as the community develops, you'll get your property tax, but it sounds like we also need to start looking at other sources of revenue. I don't know what they are.
We do, and quite honestly, later on in tonight's agenda, I'll be asking you to approve an MOU with a large development coming into the fire district, and that is one of those other pots of money that we could start using to help fund the growth of the fire district, to ensure that we are operating at the level that the community needs and desires as the community grows.
Great. The last one is just the community risk program, and I don't know if tonight's the right time, but either because it's an interesting phrase that I haven't heard, or it really is something worth looking into. Somewhere down the road, I'd like a little more explanation of that, or I can go back to the master plan and read up on it. It sounds interesting.
So it is interesting. It does have a lot of merit. It's something that I think there's a lot of opportunity for the fire district to expand on. Not to sound like a salesperson, but your next agenda item, as part of the job description for the battalion chiefs, does address creating and enhancing a community risk reduction program. So we are trying to look at other opportunities to be able to expand some of those programs, but unfortunately, the staffing right now, we just don't have the bandwidth to be able to take on additional larger responsibilities and roles in areas like community risk reduction.
Good. And then I think either in our discussions or here, there's a lot of recommendations that sound more like, there are things for staff to do that don't necessarily require any major commitments or resources from the board as much as here's your to-do list for the next 10 years.
Absolutely. There certainly are a large number of recommendations that we can handle internally. And I think that's really where the value of an independent third party to come in and look at the fire district had its value. I was talking to someone earlier, and sometimes if you keep walking by the cracked mirror or window, right? Pretty soon it becomes part of the landscape. You don't even recognize it anymore.
Right.
It's something that we need to address, but because you're so familiar with it, you don't necessarily see it. So that was why we wanted to bring in this independent third party to look at us, to help remind us that some of the things that we may have been seeing and just have become immune to or used to, help to refresh and bring it up to the top of the list that, yes, we do need to address this. Now that we have their recommendations, then it'll be up to staff to identify what we can easily address internally and then develop the priority system so that we can accomplish those more easily attained internal recommendations as soon as possible.
Great. Well, those were my initial reactions and comments. Overall, I think it's a good master plan. It gives us some good things to focus on. And like I said, other than trying to come up with the money, they're all good things that we should work towards. So thank you.
Thank you.
There got to be a question here kind of more related around recommendation A8, quality control process. Help me understand, when we have an incident, do we, what's our documentation look like on it? What's our review process of it? For example, what's working, what worked best?
So what recommendation A8 is referring to is our data entry into the National Fire Reporting System, or what we refer to as our Fire Records Management System, RMS. So we have a program that we've been using for several years. It's called Zoll. I think what this actually is more specifically calling out is it's time to invest in some training to ensure that the proper reporting nuance, codes, and so forth, consistent with the National Fire Reporting System, are being entered appropriately for the various call types.
How do we use that information internally in terms of improving quality of service?
Well, there's quite a few ways that we use it to provide information. First of all, a lot of the data that we provide in our annual report is driven from our incident reporting system, our RMS system. We're going to be able to look at it to look at resources that respond, corresponding fire loss, a lot more on the statistical side. And then I think the other part of the question you're asking is, how do we know what we're doing is working?
Yes.
So part of that is what we refer to as an after-action report after a critical incident, where we bring the responding companies back in. We talk about what went well, what went wrong, what areas of improvement are, so that we would be able to, next time we're confronted with that situation, learn from the previous incident that we'd had. So I think there's two different ways, but specifically in this recommendation, it was more for our incident reporting and the data that we're entering to ensure it's being recorded or reflected accurately.
So was there an excellent look at after incident reports and how to utilize those to improve service?
That was part that came out through the stakeholders meetings, and that's something that we'll be working on to streamline the after incident reporting part as well.
So I think that'd be very helpful. I was part of my professional career at one time. I was involved with that in a hospital setting, but yeah, I think those work well in terms of because you can identify training needs for staff, what level of competency they have, how to raise that level, what type of staffing level you need to respond, what type of equipment or communications you need. How do you collaborate with other agencies on something that involves more than one? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's especially going to be critical for us now as we start to really start to have a much younger workforce.
Yeah.
both at the firefighter level, at the captain level here soon. We're going to have a lot of very capable individuals. I don't want to say anything that would lead you to believe anything else, but they're just going to be younger in their careers, and they're going to be able to learn,
Experience matters,
have
yeah.
more learning opportunities so that we can continue to improve.
Exactly. I think as long as it's conducted in a way that's supportive of a learning process of making the team more effective,
Right.
it's a good thing. Well, thank you. Vice Chair Abadamus, did you have a comment?
I spent about an hour, a little over an hour going over this with Chief Bellier yesterday, so I don't have any questions, but I really appreciate the level of detail in the report and the presentation tonight, so thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. Is there time for public comment? Yes, public comment on this matter? Haven't received any public comment on anybody. Yes, from the audience.
Yes, good evening, Beth Marcus. I just have one question, 2 comments. Were the charge for 2021-22 that he did? The charge for all the responses and things?
Some of them are from 2018 to 2022. That was the study period for the call volume.
Okay. And then just 2 comments. Talking about a new site, I think the Napa Junction School, I'm just lobbying here, would be a great place for not only a station, but if maybe not a station, but maybe a training facility is one comment. And then the other thing, in regards to the response times, I know personally for me, when I see the fire engines coming down my street, and if they have to go down Casare, there's so many cars parked on the sides of the streets. The streets are very narrow, so it really does take them a little bit longer to get through a lot of the streets. So just my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else from attending want to comment? Seeing none?
Chair, we have one comment
Okay.
from Justin Hamilton Ho.
Okay, good evening.
Good
Mayor
evening.
and
Welcome.
I think fire department staff doing a great job, and I'm right. I hear that sometimes there's a lot of cars going up and down my street. So I want to see that be emergency alert. So I want to shout out fire chief. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Okay, thank you. Well, thank you very much for the presentation and the information we've received tonight. Very good.
Thank you very much again for the opportunity to provide you with this information, and the chief has my number if you need any follow-up.
Oh, certainly. I know we got a work plan we need to put together here, so thank you for your analysis.
Good evening.
So, and I believe our next step is to actually adopt a
adopt it,
resolution
yes,
approving that
that's
long-range
right.
master plan.
Yeah, that's right. I'm looking for it.
If there's no further comment, just because I found the reso faster, I guess, I'll make a motion, we approve resolution number 2022-26, a resolution of the Board of Directors of the American Canyon Fire Protection District approving the long-range master plan inclusive of a Center for Public Safety Excellence, 6th edition compliant community risk assessment standards of cover report.
I'll second.
Motion second. Roll call, please.
Board Member Joseph.
Yes.
Vice Chair Abadamus.
Yes.
Chairman Garcia.
Yes. Thank you. I found the page. Okay, moving on to our agenda. Next is item 8, establishment of a battalion chief position.
Yes, thank you, Chair. tonight coming forward to and to the members of the board and making the recommendation to adopt a resolution approving the battalion chief job description classification as well as salary schedule. A little bit of background about the battalion chief classification. The battalion chief classification is a mid-level managerial position responsible for the direct supervision of personnel assigned to their assigned shift. This position differs from the fire captain position, as the fire captain is responsible for the direct supervision of their assigned engine company on emergency incidents. Fire captains function at the task level, while battalion chiefs provide overall incident command over multiple companies. The battalion chief position differs from the assistant chief position, as the assistant chief is responsible for the general supervision of multiple shifts or companies, and is typically assigned an administrative schedule. Typically, the battalion chief position works a 24-hour rotating shift schedule. This proposed restructuring would ultimately result in the establishment of 3 battalion chief positions, 1 for each scheduled shift, although only 2 are being proposed at this time due to funding constraints. These mid-level chief officer positions are responsible for planning, organizing, managing, and supervising personnel, stations, equipment, emergency incidents, and will directly supervise their respective assigned shifts. Battalion chiefs command and direct complex multi-company emergency incidents, assist in implementing long-range goals and objectives, oversee daily training, assist in preparing or monitoring the budget and for their assigned programs, and direct or conduct special district programs such as fleet, facility maintenance, community risk reduction, urban search and rescue, and the Swift Water Rescue Program. In addition to providing enhanced supervision, training, and administrative support, the creation of a battalion chief position creates a career path for an entry-level firefighter to work up through the organization all the way to the ranks of assistant chief and ultimately the fire chief position. So with that, that is just a brief snapshot of the value that these positions would bring to the fire district. Obviously on your packet has the proposed salary schedule as well as the more in-depth job description. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Well, thank you for that, Chief Bellier. As we're aware, the city is growing, and the needs of our fire protection will grow along with that. Questions or comments from board members?
I'll just kind of echo those remarks. I do think the battalion chief position is needed. I think the job description does convey some value. Obviously, the command and control role, but also that functional or administrative support, I think is the term, that I think gives us an additional advantage in the sense that it will take some of the pressure off your administrative staff because some of those functional responsibilities could be handed to one of the 2 or 3 battalion chiefs. And then certainly the career path opportunity is just kind of icing on the cake as far as staffing goes. So other than, I'm a finance guy, so I'm always worrying about can we pay for it. But assuming we get that revenue coming in, I think this is a great program, a great managerial augmentation to the department. And I certainly like the job description, so I'm on board. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Abadalos.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with what Director Joseph just said. And in addition to that, I believe that our fire budget is a lot more stable than the city's budget because it's based on property tax. So I'm not a finance person, and maybe that's why, but I feel confident that we can afford this battalion chief position moving forward. And I think it's very clear at this point that we are in dire need of it. So I'm on board as well.
Very good. I was just comment additionally, the long-term report we just had reviewed speaks to particular needs that this position can certainly take charge and deliver what's needed.
If I could just interrupt real quick, Chair. While I would be happy for the board to give me the direction to moving forward to create and staff those positions, I just want to clarify tonight, I'm just looking for the board to approve both the job description and the salary range for those positions. That is the next step in getting to the battalion chiefs is we have to adopt the job description and salary range. However, if anyone wanted to make an amended motion, I would be happy for that. Just kidding.
Well, one step at a time, right? Right, this is the first good step. Okay, it's going to help a lot. Okay, if there's no further comment from the board, we'll open public hearing on it. Public comment on it. Anybody wanting to comment? Anybody online?
No, Chair.
Okay, we'll close public comment, return to board for further discussion and action.
Just real quick, so Chief, this is coming back again next month because of what happened at the last meeting where Director Oro asked for it to come back so we can talk about the budget again.
Correct. So the board's direction at the last meeting was they would like to take one last look at the budget before moving forward with actually the advertisement, testing, and then ultimately filling the positions. So tonight is just to get that job description and salary range, and then we'd come back next month with an updated budget forecast for the final direction from the board to move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. If there's no further discussion with the board,
Okay.
ready for a motion?
I'll go ahead and move resolution 2022-27, a resolution of the Board of Directors of the American Canyon Fire Protection District establishing a new mid-level management job classification of battalion chief and approving the salary schedule, or should that be a separate motion?
I believe it is all
It's
in the
The
resolution.
resolution, no.
See it? Okay.
I'll second that since it includes the salary resolution or the salary in the resolution.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Okay, motion second, roll call, please. Oh, I'm sorry, we need public comment. Do we have
We
public
did
comment?
do public comment, Mr. Mayor.
I mean, online. Do you have anybody?
No, Chair.
All right, thank you. Okay. Okay, roll call, please.
Board Member Joseph,
Yes.
Vice Chair Abadamus,
Yes.
Chair Garcia.
Yes. Thank you, board. Move on to our next item. Item number 9, amendment to professional service agreement between American Canyon Fire Protection District and CSG Consultants.
Good evening, Chair. Before you on this item is an agreement to a contract that we've had, excuse me, it's getting late. An addendum to an existing agreement that we have with CSG, which is our contracted fire marshal services here for the fire district. CSG has been providing us fire marshal services since 2019. Obviously, with that long-term work here in the district, they have an intimate knowledge of fire code enforcement here in the district. Extreme familiarity with all the proposed projects, existing projects, as well as city staff as well. So with this, traditionally on an annual basis, a large majority of our fees that we charge our customers for fire prevention services essentially reimburse the fire district for the cost of CSG. So while the agreement is for up to $100,000, that is not necessarily $100,000 that hit to our budget, because the way our fee structure is and the way we charge for inspections, plan reviews, and so forth, many of that just reimburses the district for the cost of CSG's services here. And with that, be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions?
Although this is a somewhat of a fairly routine matter, in the staff report, it talks about only 85 to 90% of the costs are recovered. My question would be, is part of, harking back to the master plan that talked about looking at some of our fees, that this might be an area where we kind of change that ratio to at least be 100% of our costs, if not a little bit above, to cover overhead and other incidentals.
Right. The goal is always to get as close to 100% as possible. However, tonight's actually a great example where George is attending and doing district work. However, it's not an instance where it would be reimbursable. We don't have a client that would be able to charge for. So there's some times where George and I are working through problems or concerns that aren't necessarily directly tied to someone that we can bill for. So that's why it's not necessarily 100% reimbursable.
Okay, now I understand. I had compartmentalized it and said if they're doing inspections, we ought to get 100% recovery. But if they're doing administrative things, then obviously we can charge ourselves, but it doesn't really go as far. But okay, now I understand. So I'm okay with it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any comment, Vice Chair Abadamos? Okay. The addendum for professional services, that's goes with this resolution, correct? Okay. All right, so if there's any public comment on this,
No, Chair.
and we don't have anything online either, correct?
No, Chair.
Okay.
If there's no
Go ahead.
other comments, I'll make a motion that we adopt resolution number 2022-28, a resolution of the Board of Directors of the American Canyon Fire Protection District approving the amendment to professional services agreement between the American Canyon Fire Protection District and CSG Consultants, Inc. for fire inspection and plan review services.
I'll second.
Motion second, roll call, please.
Board Member Joseph,
Yes.
Vice Chair Abadamos,
Yes.
Chair Garcia.
Yes. Thank you, Board. Moving on. Item 10, a memorandum of understanding between the American Canyon Fire Protection District and Buzz Oats LLC.
Good evening, Chair. So for the last several months, district staff has been working with the Buzz Oats Group, which is the developer of the proposed Giovanoni project here in American Canyon. It's a rather large project, little over 2 million square feet of warehouse. Their staff figures that were included in the draft DIR estimated up to 3,000 employees at the facility, which is about the equivalent to 1,200 full-time residents because of the shift work and things like that. So equivalent to about an increase in the working population here in the district, about 1,200 people, when the project is fully built out. District staff reviewed the draft DIR and identified that the project as proposed, once fully developed, would create a fiscal deficit for the fire district based on anticipated service demand for a facility that size with that number of employees. Through a several-month negotiation period, we were able to reach an agreement with the developer, with Buzz Oats, that the district traditionally charges two fees when projects pull their building permits: a fire mitigation fee and then an aerial fee for buildings that are 35 feet or taller. Both of those fees are one-time fees. For a project this size, it'd be roughly about $2 million for mitigation fees. Between the two, $1 million and a little bit of change for the mitigation, then about $1 million for the aerial fee. The developer proposed an alternative, which we reviewed and feel very comfortable with, is the developer will agree to pay for the mitigation fee, whatever the mitigation fee is at time of development. And in lieu of the aerial fee, they would create a community facilities district for that project that would create an annual revenue for the fire district of approximately $158,000 a year with up to a 3% CPI annually, where it's very important to really see the value of the CFD is that would not have a sunset. It would not have a time frame. In other words, they are committing that community facilities district would pay at a minimum $158,000 a year to the fire district in perpetuity. So with that, I feel very comfortable that it truly makes financial sense, not only for the developer, but for the fire district. So worked again with the developer, came up with a memorandum of understanding between the Buzz Oaks Group and the American Canyon Fire District. So tonight, asking for the board to take action on approving a resolution and subsequent signature and approval of the MOU between Buzz Oaks and American Canyon Fire District. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Questions?
So that 158,000 a year can go into general operations?
That's correct. You know, many of our mitigation fees have specific parameters in which they can be spent. This would not have that, so that would be able to come into general operations.
Good. And then the follow-up question is, how do we backfill for the revenue that would have gone towards the aerial ladder?
Yeah, so, you know, we are gonna miss out on the aerial fee, but when you look at the time frame in which we would be getting the 158,000, it's actually going to make up for it and then pay in dividends in the subsequent years. So really kind of looked at this as not a short-term investment, but looking at long-term and future sustainability of the fire district in the financial sense, and having that revenue stream in perpetuity is actually going to benefit the fire district more than the one-time fee for the aerial.
Okay. Well, yeah, definitely ongoing revenue that can be used for general operations is always exciting and harkens back to the whole point I asked earlier, how do we make up for the ongoing staffing costs? And this will cover a little bit of it. So it's a step in the right direction.
Absolutely.
Well, it's subject to increase based on consumer price index for the.
Correct.
So that 158,000 could actually go up over time.
That is correct.
Yes.
And it's also, the fire district is still going to be receiving the property tax revenue annually from the project as well. So it's not that the project is only going to be generating $158,000 a year for the fire district. There's going to be some others.
Very good. Yeah, an estimated number of employees?
Their EIR said, if I remember right, a little over 3,000 employees when the project is fully developed. I want to say like 3,200, and that was the equivalent to essentially 1,200 full-time residents in the area, because obviously when you have employees working shifts and so forth, they're not all occupying the same space at the same time.
No. Well, wearing another hat, just from the city side, we ought to be looking at what start times are, as we have it required of other businesses out in that area. So we're not congesting the highway. All right, very good. Any other public comment on this? I think it's a good plan. Thank you. Any public comment? Anybody attending want to comment? No? Anybody online?
No, Chair.
Thank you. Then we'll return to the board for further discussion, desired action.
Chief, I just wanted to say thank you for doing this. I know it's kind of been a pain, all of the back and forth with Buzz Oates, but thank you for doing this and coming up with a great plan. Or what I think. is a great
I
plan.
appreciate that, and there was some dialogue back and forth and some negotiations, but I do want to give the Buzz Oates group a credit that we were able to come to a very good resolution. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
All right, a motion to approve?
Let me pull up the resolution and I'll go ahead and make the motion unless Mark already has it up.
Well, I do, but
Go ahead.
I'm learning how to use Granicus. That's the inside scoop.
Okay.
I'll make a motion that we adopt resolution number 2022-29, a resolution of the Board of Directors of the American Canyon Fire Protection District approving the memorandum of understanding between the American Canyon Fire Protection District and Buzz Oates LLC.
And I'll second.
Motion second, roll call, please.
Board Member Joseph,
Yes.
Vice Chair Abu-Damos,
Yes.
Chair Garcia.
Yes. Thank you, Board. Moving on, we now to Fire Chief oral report.
Well, thank you. I'll try to keep it brief. This has been a pretty full agenda, but wanted to first acknowledge and thank Laura Preventure for organizing our fire department open house earlier this month. It was very well attended by the public. It was set up with a lot of very interactive booths, so the public was very interactive, not only with our firefighters, but with PG&E, talking about electrical safety, Napa Dispatch Center, American Canyon PD. We had CPR demonstrations. We had CERT there. I was...
The dog bite thing.
I wasn't going to bring that up, but yeah. You know, I had the opportunity with my family to attend several fire department open houses in another community. When your wife's getting her hair done, you got to have something to do to entertain a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old. And, you know, I was struck that while it was great that they were opening up their stations to the community, there wasn't the level of interaction with the public that we had here with the various stations and booth sets up. So really wanted to acknowledge and thank Laura for that. Moving on from that, our firefighter, our new hires, our 4 new probationary firefighters will complete their academy this Thursday. Last week, we had the opportunity to work with one of our adjoining fire agencies over in Sonoma County, and so all 4 of them got to go into several and cycle through several live fire evolutions, which, if you know firefighters, they come back from something like that and they're smiling ear to ear, and so it was really good. But you know, specifically Captain Kenneth Deedy, he's since I've been here, he's taken the reins and really run our 2 recruit academies that I've had since I've been here, and a tremendous job. And while he's the leading and facilitating the training, our on-duty crews have just had the highest level of engagement. Both engine companies are out training with the recruits every day, so it's a really neat experience to sit back and watch how our crews are supporting not only Kenny with the workload, but they're investing the time in the new members of the family. They're taking the time to go out and train them, teach them the little tricks and trades, because you know, as early as Sunday they're going to be on the engines with them. So it's been a really good experience. We're really excited about having them come on very soon. And so with that, that's really all I have for my oral report tonight.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Billion. Board members?
I made it to the open house. It was a great day, a great program. I'm glad to hear that we're more community-oriented and interactive than others. That's always makes me feel good, so good job. And Laura, since you probably did all the heavy lifting, excellent, good job.
Yeah, there wasn't a probably.
Well, it's good teamwork, right? No, I really appreciate that. I'm looking forward to more interaction on the level of the Explorer program getting started again. I think, part of recruitment for talent is we have an opportunity to grow our own. And if we plant that seed in some young person's mind about here's an opportunity and what your contribution can mean to your community, then there's possibly an opportunity to get some folks interested in being firefighters.
Yeah, and Chair, he doesn't have his camera on right now, but if you see the screen name Robert Rojas,
Yeah.
he's one of our firefighter paramedics and
There he goes.
currently one of our acting captains. He's going to be leading the Explorer program, but I think
Good.
what's really important to note is Robert started as a fire explorer in American Canyon.
Excellent. Bravo. We'll see, the program works. Yeah. Also thinking with some of the activities we had there with community, I'm sorry, I had an appointment at the airport in Sacramento, so I missed the event. But there's a group, COED, I think you're probably familiar with them, on public safety preparation for disaster, et cetera. And there might be a way certainly to link up our fire district and COED, and don't really have a sense of it yet, but we do a bit of that training at the fire department when we have our public meetings. So that's some way maybe expanding it that helps each other understand better the service provided or what we can do ourselves or with our neighbors. We have done a great one called Map Your Neighborhood. Who in your neighborhood's on a medical device that needs electricity, for example? Who knows first aid? Over at Vinny's Ranch, one of my nurse colleagues, every house but one on her street's a nurse, so if you need first aid, it's things like that. I just think we have a great fire department in American Canyon. We do. We provide great service. And I just want to thank you for what everybody's done. And I'm looking forward to implementing a lot of this in our master plan. So I think it's good stuff happening there. Any other comments, future agenda items from the board? No? All right. Well, thank you all. It's been a very enlightening evening. Got a lot of heavy lifting to do down the road, but we are certainly capable of doing that. And we have concluded our meeting for the evening. We are adjourned. Thank you all.
Bye, everybody. Bye, Justin.
Bye.
I just said, there's COED. We brought up COED. Good.